Quake, Disaster in San Francisco, 1906, Chapter 6. Judging by the angle of the sun, Jacob figured that it was past noon when he and the dog got back to the produce district. He walked up and down the block twice, stopping to ask people if they'd seen his family. But nobody recognized the name Itzhak Kaufman or remembered seeing a slim, dark-haired man holding a small girl. Where are they? He was starting to feel discouraged. Maybe they didn't come here. Maybe that man got Papa confused with somebody else. A policeman was directing traffic on one corner. Approaching him, Jacob said, "Excuse me, officer. I'm looking for my family. My father came up here after the earthquake. He was—" "Move along, son, and get that dog out of the way. We're trying to keep the street clear for emergency vehicles." Jacob picked up the dog and continued, "But you see, I don't know where they are. I don't know if—" He started to cough. His throat felt as dry as a woolen coat. The policeman blew his whistle and shouted at a group of people to keep moving. "Please, sir, I haven't seen my family since the quake." The policeman glanced at Jacob, his expression softening. "There's a lot of confusion right now, son," he said, "but don't worry, you'll find your family. Have you searched the parks? Lots of folks are over in Union Square." Jacob shook his head. Union Square was only a few blocks away, but might as well have been another continent. He didn't know if he could walk anymore. His legs ached. Studying Jacob's face, the policeman asked, "Had anything to eat or drink today, son?" "A man gave me some water." The policeman stuck his hand into a bulging pocket and brought out an apple. "Here, why don't you eat this? Then have a look-see in Union Square." Jacob thanked the policeman and took the apple. As he started to go, the policeman called him back. "They're going to start dynamiting these buildings to keep the fires from spreading. The owner of that grocery store over there has been telling folks to take whatever they can carry out." The policeman pointed to a nearby building. "Why don't you see if there's anything left?" Jacob hurried over to the little store. He ducked through its doorway and paused to let his eyes adjust to the dim room. Broken glass littered the floor, and the shelves against one wall had toppled over. Jacob took a quick survey of the other shelves, but they had been stripped bare. He checked the floor for fallen merchandise, but all he found was a small sack of spilled flour. When he ran his hand over the surface of a low, dark shelf under the counter, he finally got lucky. He touched something cool and hard. Sliding out a plate covered with a glass dome, he discovered a small wedge of cheese. He peeled off the wax and bit into the cheese, but a whimper at his feet made him pause and look down. The dog whined, tail wagging eagerly. Jacob broke off a piece of cheese and held it out in his palm, and the dog swallowed it in a single gulp. Just before leaving the store, Jacob spotted a bottle of milk that had rolled behind the door. The glass wasn't cracked, and none of the milk had spilled. He picked up the bottle and sniffed its contents. The milk smelled fresh. As he left the store, he held up the milk bottle and showed it to the policeman. The man smiled and waved. Feeling a little better, Jacob headed toward Union Square. As he walked, he kept his eyes open for something he could use as a bowl. Soon he spotted a dented piece of metal. Balancing this makeshift bowl on the ground, he poured some milk into it for the dog. While the dog lapped his share, Jacob held the bottle to his own lips and drank the rest. The cool liquid soothed his throat. Biting into the apple, Jacob started walking again. He scanned the faces of everybody he passed in the street, but nobody looked familiar. "Papa and Sophie must be in Union Square," he told himself. "They're probably looking for me." The apple's juice seemed to sweeten Jacob's thoughts. Maybe they met up with Uncle Avy and Aunt Rose. Jacob's route took him along the edge of Chinatown, a section of town that he found fascinating, but also a bit scary. Chinatown's crowded buildings were dingy and run down, and a distinctive odor lingered about them. A mix of exotic spices, spoiled seafood, and garbage. In these streets the people dressed differently and often spoke another language. Most of the shop signs were written in Chinese characters. Paper lanterns hung from balconies, and store windows displayed delicate porcelain vases and shoes made of embroidered silk. On street corners, men with skinny braids sold fancy paper fans and little dolls. Papa always warned Jacob that Chinatown was a nest of criminals and told him to avoid the area while he was doing his afternoon deliveries. But Jacob had sometimes ignored his father's warning and cut through this maze of streets and alleyways. Now, as he skirted this section, the smell of burning wood grew stronger. Waves of heat rose from the closely packed buildings, and billows of gray smoke swirled overhead. Here and there he could see orange flames licking at the sky. The streets, usually swarming with people, were practically deserted. Suddenly the dog began barking and darted into a narrow side street. "No, fella," Jacob shouted. "Come back here." The barking continued, shrill and insistent. No matter how many times Jacob called, the dog would not return to his side. Reluctantly, Jacob followed the barking. He found the dog charging at a pile of bricks and broken boards. As he got closer, he could hear a thudding noise coming from under the rubble. "Anybody down there?" Jacob hollered. "Help!" a hollow voice answered. "Somebody's trapped." Jacob pulled away a broken gate and cleared a path as best he could. He peered into a dark hole that seemed to be the entrance to a cellar. Something moved in the darkness. "Help!" a voice called. "Is somebody up there?" "Yes, I hear you," Jacob answered. He tugged at a long plank lying across the hole and managed to pull it out of the way. Under the debris he could see some steps. The dog scrambled down. "Good dog," the voice said. "You found me. Good dog." Peering into the darkness, Jacob could see someone struggling to climb out. The person wore a close-fitting cap, which was covered with fine-grained dust, and a collarless coat buttoned up to the neck. A long, skinny braid hung down his back. A Chinese man, Jacob thought. "Are you hurt?" Jacob called. The man's forehead was shaved up to the band of his cap, which made his head seem as round as an egg, and his white eyebrows looked like miniature beards. When the man wiped the dust off his face, Jacob was startled. The man's eyebrows were not white at all. They were dark brown, and his face was smooth and unwrinkled. "He's just a boy," Jacob realized. "My shoulder hurts, but I think I can move it. Can you give me a hand?" Jacob reached down and grabbed the boy's arm. Bracing himself, Jacob pulled, and the boy scrambled out of the hole. The boy stamped his feet and slapped his hip-length coat and baggy trousers. A cloud of dust flew into the air and settled onto his cloth shoes. Grinning at Jacob, he nodded. "1,000 thanks." "What happened to you?" "I ran back to get something. We live up there." The boy turned and pointed. His eyes widened. "It's on fire!" he exclaimed. "If I hadn't woken up, if your dog—" At the mention of the dog, both boys looked at the hole. Jacob whistled. "Here, fella!" "Where are you? Come on, get out of there!" After a few seconds, the dog's head appeared. "That a boy!" Jacob called, but the dog disappeared again. When it reappeared, something dark and damp was in its mouth. Jacob tried to grab the dog, but it backed out of the reach, so Jacob sat down and started to lower his legs into the hole. "You better not go in there," the Chinese boy said. "It could cave in again." Jacob lay face down over the hole, and the Chinese boy stood behind him, holding onto his hip so he wouldn't fall in. Reaching into the darkness, Jacob grabbed the dog by the scruff of the neck. As soon as he lifted it out of the hole, the dog squirmed free and dropped its prize on the ground. Jacob took a close look. The lump was furry, with a slender, flesh-colored tail. "That's a dead rat!" Jacob exclaimed. The Chinese boy grinned. "Plenty of rats in Chinatown," he said. "I think your dog has gotten his dinner." Jacob laughed. He held out his hand. "My name's Jacob. Jacob Kaufman." The boy shook Jacob's hand. "I am very happy to meet you. I am Sang Wei Cheng. My father deals in fine porcelain and jades. Our shop is in this building." Jacob winced. "Is your father—" He gestured at the collapsed doorway. "No, father is in Oakland, on business. He often takes the ferry over. That's where Uncle Juan has taken us after the earthquake." Jacob looked puzzled. "My uncle works for my father. He lives in the apartment across from us, above our shop," Chang explained. "My mother can't walk very far, and my brothers are little, so Uncle Huang took the cart to take us to the ferry. But we left in such a hurry, Mother forgot her purse. Uncle was afraid we wouldn't have enough money to pay for the ferry, so I ran back. I was going to cut through the cellar, but I couldn't get the door open. It was jammed. I tugged and kicked at it, then the doorway fell down. I think it knocked me out. I got separated from my family too," Jacob said. "I was in the produce district when the earthquake hit. I ran home. We lived south of Market. Our building was wrecked, and a man said my family had gone to the produce district. But I couldn't find them there, so I'm on my way to Union Square to look for them." The roar of the flames was growing louder. Jacob heard a loud, crackling sound, then a dull boom. The boys looked at each other and hurried out of the narrow street. They waited on the corner, but when the dog didn't follow them, Jacob cupped his hands around his mouth and whistled. The dog came trotting out of the side street, carrying the remains of the rat in his mouth. "What's your dog's name?" the Chinese boy asked. Jacob hesitated. He was about to explain that the dog really didn't belong to him, but he thought about how he would have run into a building that had collapsed during the earthquake, and how he'd frozen when that steer was stampeding right at him. He made a decision. "I'm not leaving this dog on the street. He saved my life." "Quake," he announced. "My dog's name's Quake." "In honor of the earthquake?" Jacob nodded. San Wei Chang smiled. "I think that's a fine name for a brave animal. If your animal hadn't heard me, I could have died in the fire. He jumped in that dark hole after me." The boys shook hands before they parted. "I hope you will find your family soon, Jacob Kaufman." The Chinese boy waved and headed down the hill in the direction of the ferry. Jacob turned west toward Union Square. Quake trotted along beside him. Jacob hadn't gone more than 2 blocks when the dog turned and barked. Jacob looked behind him and saw San Wei Chang running to catch up. "Jacob! Jacob Kaufman, wait!" he hollered. "I just met my neighbor, Mr. Liang. He said they aren't letting people go down to the ferry. He told me that many Chinese have gone to the parks. Is it all right if I come with you to Union Square? It's possible I will find my mother and uncle there." Embarrassed, he dropped his eyes. "My father says that I should not expect a white person to help a Chinese. But you and your dog saved my life, so I wish to repay you by helping you find your family." Jacob gave the boy a friendly punch in the arm. "You don't owe me anything. You would have done the same for me, San Wei." Chang grinned. "Call me San." "All right, San," Jacob repeated. "We'll stick together, you and me and Quake."